Thank you very much. Good afternoon. I'm Councillor Elizabeth Swinglehurst and I chair the River Wye Nutrient Management Board. Welcome to this afternoon's meeting. For those present in the building, if the fire alarm sounds, please leave the building by the nearest exit. Make your way to the fire assembly point in the car park. The agenda papers and other relevant information for this meeting are available on the Herefordshire Council website. Please ensure that mobile phones, laptops, etc. are turned to silent. Thank you. And now I'd like, if I may, to introduce Dr. Louise Bodnar, who is the voice of the River Wye.
I've brought the River Wye with us here to witness our meeting, and I'd just like us to take a moment to consider our relationship with water and our gratitude to water. I'd like to give thanks to the waters that quench our thirst and cleanse us each day. I'd like to give thanks to the ocean, our first mother. I'd like to give thanks to all the springs and streams and rivers. I give thanks to all the lakes and ponds and pools. Thank you, waters. Thank you for being here with us and still giving us your gifts. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Okay, so agenda item number 1, apologies for absence. Apologies have been received from voting board members Georgie Hyde from the NFU, Pat Sterling, Friends of the Upper Wye, and also Alistair Chapman, who's the Head of Environment Sustainability Forest of Dean District Council, and Martin Quine from the Environment Agency, and also a very last minute apology from Simon Evans from the Wye and Us Foundation, who's been unavoidably detained. And I'd like to welcome Adam Taylor, who has taken over from Liz Bickerton as a board member for Banabrychoniog National Park Authority. Welcome, Adam.
Thank you. Mr. Vernon has his hand up.
So who do we have? Oh, yeah, Paul Vernon. Paul.
Sorry, yeah, just apologies from Gordon Green. Not able to attend, but we'll watch the recording.
Thank you. Duly noted. Thank you. Okay. So the notes document of the. Sorry, we have. Oh, sorry, Councillor Charlton.
Could I just check that we haven't had any apologies from Powys County Council? I mean, I know I'm here, but I'd like to see officers here, and I couldn't see anybody in the list. But has anybody sent any apologies? If not, I need to check that one through.
We haven't received anything, Councillor Charlton.
Okay, thanks. I'll check that out then. Thank you.
Okay,
I haven't had any apologies, so I'm disappointed.
Okay, thank you. Thanks very much. That's it. Okay, good. Agenda item 2, notes of the previous meeting. The notes document of the meeting held on the 29th of April is included in the agenda pack. Are those members present content that I sign the notes as an accurate record? Yeah, thank you. Agenda item 3, questions from members of the public. Question has been received from Alison Caffin. It's published in Supplement 1. It comprises a number of bullet points, and I invite Gemma Dando to respond.
Thank you very much for the question that we received. We're going to respond to this one in writing. There's quite a number of different things that it covers, so we'll make the response available with the minutes from the next meeting, but make sure we get directly back as well in writing.
Okay, thank you. So agenda item 4, it's the main body of the agenda, and that's the River Lugg SSSI condition assessment. So over to Cleminette for an introduction to that. Thank you.
Yes, thank you. So as you will be aware from the notes, we conducted a full condition assessment of the River Lugg in 2025 and into 2026, and that analysis has now been completed. So we're just going to take you through a visual walkthrough of the results. And you'll be glad to know I'm not going to do that. I'm joined online by Daisy, Boris and Gertruda Zainuti, who are two of our senior water advisors, who are the ones who conducted the assessment and undertook much of the analysis. So they're going to share their screen and walk you through the assessment. So I'll hand over to them.
Thank you, Claire. I'm just setting up, so just give me 2 seconds. Could
That's great.
Claire,
We can see it. Yeah.
Can you see it?
Yep,
Okay,
we can see it in full
perfect.
screen view. Thank you.
Amazing. Well, thank you so much for having us. As Claire so kindly introduced, my name is Gertruda, and I'm co-presenting today with my colleague Daisy, and we're going to walk you through the River Lugg condition assessment today. This is a presentation that was delivered to the landowners last week, and we've had some really useful feedback and discussions post the event. So hopefully it's insightful, but yeah, so let's just get started. So the objectives of today, and again, this was targeted to the landowner audience, but of course we're eager to hear your views as well, is that we're here to share the condition assessment. We want to have a bit of feedback. We want to hear your views, but at the end of the day, it's all about just finding ways to work together. So you're probably well aware of where the River Lugg is and what it is, but just to make sure everyone is on the same page. Today, we're going to be focusing on the English side of the River Lugg, which is shown in the map in front of you. So the English side of the River Lugg is separated into 4 units, and it is designated by Natural England for a huge range of different features. Now, what does a designation actually mean? Well, River Lugg is one of the best examples in Britain of a clay river, and it's only one of the 46 designated rivers in the whole country, which makes it incredibly important. And it's notified both as a site of special scientific interest and also as a special area conservation for a huge range of different features, for its rare flora, fauna, geographical features. It's a huge range of different things that you can see right in front of you. But today we're going to focus on the river and streams feature. I'll pass on to my colleague Daisy for this section.
Okay. Hi everyone. Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Great. So yeah, I'm Daisy Burris, and I sit within the National SSSI monitoring team. And I was the main project officer who was coordinating this assessment. So first, I just wanted to quickly go over what a SSSI condition assessment actually involves. So there are 4 sort of key main components to assessing the condition of a river. And we split that into hydrological, chemical, physical, and biological. So the first thing we look at when assessing the condition of a river is the hydrological aspect. So that's really looking at the river's flow regime. And to do that, we undertake an analysis of all of the obstructions in the catchment and all of the discharges in the catchment, and look at how those obstructions and how those discharges are influencing the site's natural flow regime. And that's undertaken through different modelling processes. We then look at water quality data, and so for this we work really closely with our Environment Agency colleagues and utilise their network of water quality monitoring sites. And so we look at an assessment of organic pollution, so that's looking at how things like fertiliser and sewage influence the condition of the river. And so that's looking at things like oxygen saturation levels in the river and ammonia levels. We also undertake an assessment of nutrient pressure and look to see the status of chemical pollution as well. So after looking at the hydrology and the water quality, We then look at the physical structure of the river itself. And for the River Lugg, we undertook 2 weeks of surveys, undertaking river habitat surveys. So river habitat surveys are a survey where you look at things like what the bank's made of, what the bed's made of, different flow profiles, look for riffles, pools, look at the substrate to get an overall picture of how that river is functioning. And as part of that assessment of habitat structure as well, we look at things like barriers and siltation influences. And then finally, once you have those sort of 3 core components of the river, so flows, water quality and structure, we then look at the biological assemblages. So for this, we really focused on the plant community in the river and also the macroinvertebrate community. Next slide, please. So I'm going to just set out here what favourable condition actually means in practice. So one of Natural England's core ambitions is to get sites into favourable condition. So what does this actually look like when we're talking about a river? Well, for a site to be considered in favourable condition, the water needs to be unpolluted, clean and well oxygenated. And we would expect to see that physical habitat in a predominantly unmodified and pristine state. I want to see rivers which are free-flowing with no significant barriers which might be influencing fish migration or sediment transfer through the system. And siltation should really be at a level which isn't harming the wildlife in the river. I want to see fairly low intensity land use along the majority of the river corridor. And also to see woody debris as a really significant component of the river, helping to shape its form and function. And finally, we want to see plants and insects with healthy, diverse and resilient populations. Next slide, please.
Thank you, Daisy. So now that we're all on the same page, let's start with our walkover. So to do this, we're going to walk the English side of the River Lugg catchment by unit. So as mentioned previously, we have the 4 units and we're going to walk them top to bottom, so upstream to downstream. Where it joins into the Wye. And we're going to highlight, as we're walking through each unit, we're going to highlight the physical habitat. We're going to talk about the wider floodplain. We're going to mention the vegetation, as well as any additional pressures that were observed on the river. We're going to provide you with very brief summaries of each unit, and this is where it's been taken out of the condition assessment report, which you already have available on your website. As well as then finish off with some final considerations where we're going to look at a few historic nutrient trends. We're going to look at the overarching vegetation on river health, some sort of brief overarching river summary. And so hopefully that'll give you a bit of an idea of what the condition assessment entailed. But of course, the whole document is there available if you would like to dig deeper into the details of it all. So we're going to start with Unit 4. So this may seem counterintuitive, but it starts with Unit 4 upstream and moves down to Unit 1 downstream. So we're going to start with Unit 4. And so we undertook 4 surveys in this section, which starts at Prestine all the way down to Aimstree.
Okay, so I'm going to talk to you guys about the physical habitat. And yeah, as Gertruda said, we undertook a number of river habitat surveys along this reach. And I think the thing that really stood out to us was just how pristine, unmodified, and absolutely fantastic the habitat was along so many sections along this river. You can see some really classic pool, riffle, run sequences, and a huge diversity of habitat within the river channel itself. You can see nice bars on the side there, trees along the length of the river, and there was really very high habitat diversity and very few modifications along this section. Next slide, please. So here are just a couple of photos of some tree features which we had. So along this section, there was a really nice mix of more shaded reaches, much more open reaches, and areas with more sort of dappled shading. And the river was predominantly tree-lined along the majority of the reach, with really nice features like these sort of old veteran trees, creating lovely potential sites for halts. lots of underwater tree roots, which are great as sort of areas for juvenile fish to rest in. Yeah, and good shading, helping to keep the river cool, with overall trees forming a really significant sort of component of the river habitat. Next slide. Just got a really nice picture of here of some large woody debris in the channel. And large woody debris was recorded in the channel throughout this unit. And you can see here how that's such an important component of the river because it helps to create that diversity of flows along the river channel, which helps to create that sort of variety of niches which are required for all of the different animals and plants which live in a river. So it creates faster flows here, you can see on the right, and then a bit of a pool there on the left, which is, really important for things like fish to rest in and to shelter in. Next slide.
Right, so let's have a bit of a look at some of the river supporting habitat. So it's largely when we're talking about the wider floodplain connectivity. So in this particular unit of the River Lugg, as Daisy mentioned, the river was really well connected to the floodplain. It was actively meandering across it, and just generally showed really good connectivity to its sort of wider floodplain, wider environment. And this is a really good example in this picture of tree cover. You can see there's sections where there's a bit denser tree cover and sections that are a bit barer. And that's exactly the type of thing we'd be looking for. We don't need rivers to be covered with continuous tree cover. We want, sort of a good level of cover with sort of a good level of grazing, which again, we can see that in the photo. There's limited poaching. And especially when rivers are managed through sort of livestock density, we don't need to find ourselves in situations where we need to put up fences because the habitat is managed very well, efficiently. And I wanted to also show you a section of a river which didn't have a lot of tree cover, but in this particular section, just wanted to highlight that erosion and deposition are two key critical components of a healthy river function. So we would expect the erosional process to take place because it is a critical habitat for kingfishers and sand martins. So a bare bank like this in this particular photo, it does maybe increase some of the erosion processes, but overall it is a natural part and natural function of a river.
Yes, I'm going to talk to you guys about the plant communities. So we undertook what are called leaf pack surveys along the river. And so this was following the same method to assess the plant community that's undertaken by the Environment Agency for Water Framework Directive reporting. And when you undertake the plant surveys, these are done along 100-metre reaches, and we co-located the surveys with those river habitat surveys so we could sort of further interpret the data. And out of the plant survey, you get a classification. And so that classification ranges from bad, poor, moderate, good, and high. And for SSSI rivers, we're really aiming and want to see the river to be achieving a high ecological status along its entire length, because high ecological status essentially indicates that the plant community is in a near natural state, so it's reflecting what would be expected under sort of more natural reference conditions. And so, along this unit, we undertook four plant surveys. And there was really high plant species diversity along these reaches, with sort of all of the species or the majority of the species you would expect to see for the river of this type along this section. And 3 out of 4 of those surveys were assessed as good ecological status. However, in some of the reaches, there was really high algae cover, so this ranged from about 20 to 45%. And this is potentially higher than we would expect to see, and probably one of the reasons which was driving that ecological status of good rather than high. Now, we all know algae is an indicator of eutrophication pressure, But it's also an indicator. High algae cover can also be an indicator of other things as well, including higher temperatures and also flow pressure as well. Next slide.
Okay, thank you. So I will move on to share some of the pressures we identified in this section. So as highlighted in these photos, some of the bare banks and the land use management were contributors to some of the silt and potentially some of the nutrients in the river channel. So in this particular case, the distance between the river and sort of the land use was really quite minimal. So we would expect to see maybe slightly better management of the riparian corridor. And again, that's just to support the healthy river function. And another key pressure were physical in-channel structures, such as weirs. So this is a really good example of how such large structures, they do impact on the physical habitat, because what happens is that some of the sort of fish species, they're just not able to migrate up these structures. It will impact some of the disconnection between the invertebrates as well, but also these structures are very good at trapping silts and nutrients behind them. So again, it just impacts on those physical processes that we talk about here.
So yeah, to summarise for Unit 4, the aspects of the river which were found to be in favourable condition was the flow regime. There's a little asterisk there because we found at modelling for extremely low flows, there was a 1% non-compliance. However, due to sort of modelling error and confidence in that modelling error, overall we would assess the flows to be favourable and generally fairly near natural. As I said, large body debris was assessed throughout the reach. Siltation in this unit was actually not assessed to be unfavourable overall, and that physical habitat was assessed to be favourable too. However, aspects of this unit which were assessed to be in unfavourable condition was water quality. So water quality was water quality was unfavourable across this unit for nutrients. In-channel structures, a fairly extensive invasive species, so Himalayan balsam, signal crayfish. As I said, the plant community, whilst really diverse, was showing signs of high algae cover and potential eutrophication. And that bank vegetation, so that riparian corridor along extensive sections of this unit, was sort of predominantly arable agriculture, which isn't necessarily helping support a favourable condition of the river.
Okay, well, now we're done with Unit 4. We're going to continue moving further downstream to Unit 3. And this short section between Ames Street down to Eighton, we undertook 2 surveys in this location.
So yeah, the physical habitat along this section, again, had a really great diversity of in-channel habitats, really nice classic sort of riffle pool sequences. You can see a really nice pool on the side here in that picture. And again, great floodplain connectivity and good tree cover. However, what was quite interesting and which was noted as we sort of went down the river was that the channel substrate started to become much more silted as we went along, and you can see sort of a demonstration of that in the image there on the left. Next slide. But again, large woody debris was recorded throughout this unit, and again, really important component of the river, helping to create that diversity of habitats within the channel. Next slide.
And then in terms of the river supporting habitat, as Daisy mentioned, we had really good floodplain connectivity. We had, as shown in these 2 examples in the photos, a range of heavily wooded and some sort of bit more bare type landscapes. But yeah, overall, it showed really good type of management.
So we undertook 2 surveys of the plant community in this unit. And the survey at the further upstream point achieved high ecological status, so that was really great, really high species diversity, very low algae cover, and achieving favourable condition. However, the survey sort of further downstream in the unit recorded poor ecological status, and that was really driven by really high filamentous algae cover, but also fairly low species diversity in that unit. So quite a big difference between the sites, just showing sort of how big a range you can get along the unit. Next
So
slide.
in terms of the pressures on the site, again, weirs and in-channel structures such as these were a significant pressure on the unit. And as mentioned previously, they are significant in trapping the sediments and the associated nutrients, but also in terms of preventing fish migration. Additionally, we started noticing some other pressures on the banks in the form of, this is a really good example on the right, a collapsing field drain. Again, these type of structures, especially when not maintained, they can sort of cause some significant pressure, both from a physical perspective, but also the amount of sediment and nutrients they'll be contributing. And so another really good example I wanted just to highlight here is that we're now sort of starting to see a bit more poaching of the banks in this section. So as Daisy previously showed you the picture of the green algae covering the riverbed, again, we can see in this photo the sort of the poaching of the banks is sort of slowly eroding and increasing the amount of silt and potentially nutrients, and it's sort of it's just sort of driving the eutrophication of this area. And overall, this sort of siltation will have a huge impact on the fish habitat suitability, as well as the type of inverts that may be found here.
So to summarise for Unit 3, again, flows, large body debris and large body debris and habitat modification were considered to be favourable. However, unfavourable was the water quality, in-channel structures, invasives, plant community overall, that adjacent bank vegetation and siltation pressure.
So we're moving to Unit 2. So in this section, we're just north of Leominster and we're going south towards Hope under Dinmore. And in this particular section, we undertook 6 survey locations.
Yeah, so along this reach, there was really high habitat variability, with 2 of the sites assessed as predominantly unmodified and natural. However, 4 of the sites assessed as really fairly significantly modified. In this picture here, we've just got an example of a couple of sections which were predominantly unmodified. You can see nice riffle there in the right hand side, and sort of a nice bar which is being formed on the left hand side, and providing really high quality river habitat. Next slide, please. But along this section, we started to see the influence of a lot of historic management for a wide variety of purposes, including drainage schemes, for sort of agricultural improvement, far more extensive flood banks. And we know that a lot of work was undertaken on the Lugg sort of between the 1930s and the 1980s for a wide variety of different purposes relating to flood management. But that's really resulted in a number of sections becoming heavily sort of over deepened, over widened. And this was really clear to see because you get sort of far more sluggish flows, heavier siltation, and quite modified in-channel habitat with a loss of sort of diversity of the features which we saw more ubiquitously upstream. So less sort of riffle features, pool features, and a much more sort of uniform channel structure. And we tended to see as well in these sections that where you have flows which are slower and more sluggish, you get more siltation and higher cover of things like algae as well. Next slide. Yeah, here are just another couple of examples of some quite heavily historically modified reaches. You can see water clarity is quite poor, and also really steep, really incised banks there on the right, sort of banks up to about 3 meters deep.
So in terms of the river supporting habitat, as Daisy mentioned, the wider floodplain was largely disconnected from the river, and largely due to this type of historic management of the river. Additionally, we observed a lot of the banks were quite heavily poached. You can see in this example that there's been a fence that was recently put up to sort of to discourage the poaching activity. But again, this sort of could be highlighted as a more suitable management could be undertaken with more appropriate stocking density. And additionally to that, the overall floodplain habitat was quite heavily managed. We've observed a lot of embankments throughout this reach. So in the photo on the right, you can see that the section of the river was largely filled with just a single line of trees with fairly intensive arable behind this single line of trees. So it doesn't really create a very diverse riparian zone, and it doesn't give the river a lot of the sort of natural function that it needs. And yeah, so just a picture on the right, again, just sort of highlighting some of that management behind the single line of trees.
Yes, so this section of the river was classified as overall poor ecological status for its plant community. And you can see here in this picture just sort of a really high cover of silt, diatoms, and filamentous algae covering that riverbed. But it is worth saying that the reaches did retain still fairly high species diversity. However, yeah, just quite impacted overall by high algae cover.
So in terms of the pressures observed during this unit, as previously mentioned, embankments had a significant impact on that function. So in this particular example, you can see how the land behind the embankment is so much lower than the sort of the riverbank. And what that means is that it's going to impair the water movement. So especially during flooding periods, once the water overtops the embankments, it is largely trapped behind those embankments. It doesn't have that sort of free movement laterally. So it does depend on heavy use of drainage throughout the catchment to actually help move this water out rather than allowing that free movement to take place. And again, as Daisy mentioned, we are seeing a lot more of this sort of sluggish flow, heavy deposition, but also quite abundant, quite obvious in these sort of slow moving rivers, is creating favorable conditions for signal crayfish. And in general, there's just a lot less habitat for fish.
So yeah, overall for this unit, assessed to be favourable was the flow regime, and large woody debris was still recorded throughout the unit, which was really positive to see. However, aspects which were assessed as unfavourable, again, was the water quality, so that nutrient pressure in channel structures. Invasive species, so saw sort of extensive burrowing from signal crayfish. And also, Himalayan balsam sort of often forming a really key component along that riparian channel, and both of those can exacerbate that siltation pressure. Plant community in poor status, quite significant habitat modification from historic dredging activities, lack of sort of natural bank vegetation, and heavy siltation pressure.
So last but not least, we're finishing off with Unit 1, So it starts just south of Hope under Dinmore, and it goes down south towards Hampton Bishop, where it joins the Wye. So during this particular reach, we surveyed 9 locations.
Yeah, so again, along this reach, we had a really high diversity in terms of the physical habitat of the river itself. And 3 of those sites assessed were assessed to be in favourable condition. And so we had, yeah, really good floodplain connectivity in some of the reaches. You can see here trees forming a really sort of like core component of the river channel, lots of pools, riffles, yeah, and that good sort of like lateral floodplain connectivity. Next slide. However, a number of the reaches again had been, historically modified, and that's through sort of things like straightening, dredging, and embanking again, resulting in all of those pressures which we've just covered.
So in terms of the river supporting habitat, much like we mentioned in the previous section in the Unit 3, Unit 2, is the river is quite disconnected from its wider floodplain, and it is not functioning very well. So again, if you can see in these photos, really quite high embankments present throughout, which is leading to this disconnection. And again, that sort of lateral water movement. And as you can see, there is this drain to help support and manage that water during flooding periods, because there isn't a way for that water to return naturally back into the river. And in some of the sections during this unit, where the ones that weren't heavily embanked, there were pressures, I guess, just in terms of the wider management. The wider land use was quite bare, as you can see in these photos, and there wasn't a lot of sort of function to help support the good biodiversity needed for the healthy function of the river. Additionally, the banks that could be approached quite easily by livestock did observe quite a lot of heavy poaching activity. So again, what you can see in the photos here is there's a lot of silt and sediments being introduced into the river as a result of this heavy poaching.
So along this section, there have been 9 plant surveys undertaken, and 6 of those by Natural England during those 2 survey weeks. And again, along these reaches, there was really, really high, really good plant diversity. Start to see things like water crowfoot here and pondweeds, potamogetons. But overall, that plant community was assessed to be moderate ecological status. And again, that moderate status was really driven by really high filamentous green algae cover along a number of these sections. I think in one of the most downstream sections, the survey reach was covered by about 60% filamentous green algae. And that was, yeah, really an indication, of quite high nutrient levels in the river. But again, along with other pressures as well, sort of like high, such as, high temperatures.
So in terms of the pressures, I think we already covered quite an extensive amount. The embankments did cover sort of a significant contribution of that. And I just want to highlight that yet again, of the amount of sort of catchment drainage and how it's being managed in this section. And that is a considerable pressure for the healthy function of the river. Additionally, there are numerous sites with extensive signal crayfish pressure. Again, here I just wanted to include one that's been recently beheaded by a local otter. So, they are local species that help manage some of these issues, but it is a significant pressure on the catchment.
So yeah, similar to sort of most of the upstream units, again, flows were assessed as favourable, along with large woody debris. And there's just one weir in this unit, but it has a functioning multi-species fish pass on it. However, aspects which were unfavourable, again, similarly to those upstream units, we've got the water quality pressure from phosphorus, invasives, that plant community, extensive habitat modification and siltation pressures. So if we just sort of go on to wider considerations and have a quick look at some of the graphs which were produced to assess the influence of nutrients. So we're for the River Lugg, we're focusing on phosphorus. Just got two graphs here. So one is the River Lugg at Wergens Bridge and one's the River Lugg at Morderford Bridge. The red line is the site target. And then the green line, the crosses are the annual average, which just connected up with a standard linear regression. And really, what these graphs are just demonstrating is that pressure from that nutrient pressure is is quite significant. Annual averages sort of up to 2 to 3 times the target year on year. And there's been that sustained pressure across the catchment for over 20 years now. As part of the diffuse water pollution plan, modelling was undertaken to understand the sources of the nutrients and where they're really coming from. And it's estimated that within the Lugg, about 82% of phosphates in the Lugg catchment originate from rural land use, with wastewater comprising around about 14% of nutrients. But it is worth also saying that if we go back and look at much more historical data, the concentration of nutrients in the river have come down over the long term. And so it's not always clear why we're starting to see this higher filamentous green algae cover in the plant communities when nutrient levels have been high for a really long time. Next slide. And that brings me on to just sort of giving an overview again of the plants. So up at the top of the catchment, we tended to see sites which were in fairly good ecological status, but you can see here, so the green dots are good, orange are poor, yellow are moderate, and the blue dot there is high. So you can sort of see that as you get down from the very top of the catchment, plant condition sort of starts to deteriorate, and then sort of is pretty low around Leinster, and then flicks between moderate and poor between Leinster and Hereford. And as part of the condition assessment, went back and looked at lots of historical records of the plant community. And so there are historical records going back to the 1980s for the River Lugg. And what was quite interesting was that in the surveys which were undertaken historically in the 1980s, the cover of things like Cladophora, so the sort of like core component of that filamentous green algae, were recorded as less than 0.1% in pretty much all of the survey reaches. However, when we, undertook the surveys last year in 2025, we were getting an average cover of algae around about 25% across all of those sites. Species diversity was quite similar actually to back in the 1980s, although quite a sort of significant difference in the actual species composition, but it's quite difficult to kind of compare like to like year to year. But what was quite clear is there has been quite a significant shift to a more algal dominated state. Next slide.
Okay, and just to finish off, let's do a quick sort of river summary of what we've learned today. So the condition of the River Lugg, the way it is today, it is a result of both modern but also historical management throughout the catchment. And it isn't just riparian corridors, it is on the catchment scale. We were wonderfully surprised by the amount of tree cover that was present, especially in the form of the woody debris that was present in channel, because it did provide that really good habitat that we talked about. And it does provide really good sort of, nurseries and habitats for fish and invertebrates. But overall, nutrients and silt were a significant challenge. As highlighted in the satellite image from 2024, you can really see how the River Lugg is causing a significant sort of silt input into the River Wye. So when we're talking about working on a catchment scale on the whole, restoring the Wye, we do really need to think about the impacts that the different tributaries have, and how we can make sure that we're actually working holistically on a whole catchment scale. And yeah, just to sort of mention, you're probably all aware of this already, but River Lugg is the most significantly failing tributary of the Wye catchment. Um, so in terms of things that we may need to focus on is the sort of the land use, but also the greater connectivity within the floodplains, because not only is it good for the river to have that really good connectivity, but it helps bring a lot of local um, local benefits from increased biodiversity and flood storage. So it has overarching benefits for society. And I did just want to again highlight that in terms of the catchment drainage, it is sort of seen as observed as an issue throughout the catchment. It isn't just immediately adjacent to the river. And just to sort of, I guess, just bring it back into the context of our current day understanding of the river, and what we're seeing on the ground is that temperatures are increasing significantly. And that is going to have a long-term impact as we're continuing to experience climate change impacts. The river is also experiencing the same impacts with these increasing temperatures, which may be a large contributor to the reason why we're seeing what we're seeing here today. And again, I just wanted to sort of highlight this was again largely targeted towards landowners, but that there is a lot of support available through our farm advice, whether that's SFI, higher tier, or capital grants. We do have people on the ground who are very actively going out and engaging and supporting those wider processes and recovery. That's it. So thank you very much. I'll stop sharing now.
Thank you very much to Gertruda and to Daisy for that very, very good run through of the condition report. So I will just remind members, obviously we are the Nutrient Management Board, so the condition report covers quite a wide spectrum of things, but a certain number of those things will fall to the Wye Catchment Partnership and inform that catchment plan. Obviously there will be things within the Venn diagram of our activities where we kind of cross over, but just to pop that in everyone's head. I was struck by some of the language in the report, which was as robust as I have ever seen in a report of this nature. And so I'll just touch on that if I may. Catchment-wide measures to address diffuse water pollution are urgently required to significantly decrease catchment source to phosphate pollution. The conversion of arable cropping in the floodplain to low-intensity semi-natural habitat should be a priority. Field drainage is extensive across the Lugg catchment. Catchment drainage increases the conveyance of sediment-bound phosphate. Measures to mitigate the conveyance of sediment-bound phosphate should also be urgently investigated. And the Environment Agency have published an updated diffuse water pollution plan for the River Wye catchment in 2025. The actions in this plan should be urgently implemented to address diffuse pollution pressures across the catchment. And then very strikingly towards the conclusion of the document, the River Lugg SSSI cannot be restored through in-channel works and voluntary measures alone. It requires catchment-wide pressure reduction in a coordinated way. Achieving the necessary reduction in loads will require significant change in how land is managed, going beyond incremental improvements and business-as-usual approaches. A system shift in governance and land use is required to restore the site to a thriving, ecologically resilient system. I think the question in my mind is going to be how. And that's for us, probably to discuss and see in what ways can the Nutrient Management Board help? What can we do to make that come about? I think there are one or two things as well that seem to me to be. I really liked the fact that there was a gap analysis or sort of knowledge gap summary in the document, because it helps to point out things that you think, well, yeah, actually, where do we need better knowledge? The link between sedimentation and filamentous green algae is something that is really important in this river, and the suggestion that we need to have some evidence of the source of siltation, even though that's probably, not totally mysterious to us all, but nevertheless, that would appear to me to have value. So I put that out as a thought, because if we can really narrow that down, then that will help to narrow down actions. It will help to bring focus, and it will help, I think, to create that broad base of understanding that we need to get to, because we're not there. I mean, definitely, I've spoken to people who live within that catchment whose belief it is that the sedimentation is caused by the burrowing of the signal crayfish. Certainly, that doesn't help. But is it the main cause, or is it a minor contributing factor? We would need that bit of evidence to tell us, and I think that would probably be worth thinking about getting that. Yeah, Claire, please.
Yeah, thanks for that, Alyssa. And at the landowner event, there were similar questions in a slightly different vein about where that sediment's coming from. So that is something we've taken away from the previous meeting. And Gertrude has already looked into whether there's any previous academic research on sediment, but it's called sediment fingerprinting. So that is something we're actively looking at to see if we can get that even more definitive response. So we're working with the Environment Agency on that. So that's something in hand that, Gertrude is already working on, and we will report back, because I think sometimes I think we feel, gosh, we've got so much evidence, but we are still getting challenged. There are still questions being asked that we can further refine where those actions need to take, and also further change some thinking in terms of just really nailing, where that sediment is coming from. So that should be a good piece of work if we can get that funded.
Yeah, that's great, and I think we would fully support that as an outcome or an action. There are some challenging things here with a whole unit scale land use is assessed as unfavourable to support favourable condition of the site. Current land use is not conducive to supporting a naturally functioning river. Significant land use change along the riparian corridor is required. Again, the question how is what we will need to start to address, I think. And the other thought that I had is that sometimes you get the condition report will report either a deterioration or an improvement, and it's how do we arrive at some narrative around that, particularly these kind of anomalous upticks or downticks, and you can say, well, why did that suddenly happen? Well, what's going on with that? And it's slightly kind of just hangs there without explanation. And I know you can't immediately hypothesize where there isn't the data, but again, that might with some thinking about that, it maybe starts to reveal another data gap. Why did something improve in 25, 26? Why did we get upticks and downticks in filamentous algal growth? Is it the weather? Is it flow? Is it temperature? What are the other things that are playing into this? That kind of would be a kind of a useful way of thinking about it. And yeah, then obviously I'm going to say that this as a document, and it will kind of relate to later in the agenda, I think we're talking about the nutrient plan Haskell. This has got to be a foundation document for that as well, I think would be my suggestion. Right, so I'm going to shut up now and pass over to Andrew. Okay, well, Christine.
Hi, I really have to apologise because I haven't had time to read the full report yet, and I certainly will. First, it's a terrible pity that the river crosses the border and that we don't, as an inhabitant of near Prestine, that we don't have a similar assessment of the upper Lugg at the same time. I mean, I know they're done both sides of the border, but it would be really nice to have them in conjunction. The other thing that I wanted to bring up was you said, looking at the macrophyte diversity in 2000 and the 80s till now, that it was difficult to say anything about the species, although the diversity was about the same. Um, as you probably know, some of us in Friends of the River Wye are very concerned with what's happened to the ranunculus and are trying to look into this. But given that the ranunculus is the defining species as a habitat for the general biodiversity in the River Wye and its tributaries, I was sort of surprised that there was no comment on that, because if there's a similar measure of diversity, but it doesn't include the key species, then this is surely a pretty significant factor.
I think Daisy's going to pick that one up.
Hi there. Yeah, hi, thanks, Christine. I suppose the first thing to say is that you get a natural turnover of what aquatic plant species you would find in a river year to year. And so we undertook these surveys in 2025, and we're comparing to a series which were undertaken in 1980. But that's just a snapshot in time, and without sort of, more longitudinal surveys, so surveys every year, we're not really going to fully understand how that species composition sort of shifts and change, because you do get a natural variation year on year. On the specific point of ranunculus, I need to go back and sort of like double check this, but I think when I looked at cover values for ranunculus back in the 1980s for the River Lugg specifically, cover values were actually very, very low. And that's not actually hugely surprising for a river of this type, because it's got quite a loose shingle bed which actively moves. And so we wouldn't necessarily expect to see high cover of water crowfoot along this reach, like you would in a different river system, like the River Wye, because you don't have that sort of stable cobble gravel bed. It's a different river type, and that's why in the report it wasn't picked up that there was necessarily a significant loss of ranunculus, because we don't have that really clear evidence base in the plant records that we have to say that there were these huge beds along the river.
Thank you.
Andrew.
Thanks, Chair. I'd like to express big thank you to everyone that's involved with this report, because I think it is quite exceptional and really highlights a lot of the things that we've been discussing here in the Nutrient Management Board over the past 2 years. Looking at the executive summary and your recommendations, my single question is, who will now implement these? Because if we've got these ideas, we need to know who's going to do them, and is implementation within the scope of NE, and if not, who they consider responsible. Because it's often the case, it's the actions, timeframes and accountability that seems missing from this report.
Yeah, absolutely. So thank you for your thanks. Yeah, that is appreciated, and a significant amount of work went into that. And obviously we come back to that. So there's some actions that Natural England can take forward in our remit with our farm advice, for instance. There's some actions that the Environment Agency can take forward. But what we've tried to put across in this report is there isn't one single agency or one single body that can solve this in the current climate. It's this collaboration that the Nutrient Management Board is trying to drive, that the Wye Catchment Partnership on that wider holistic level is trying to drive, and it's that joint collaboration. We do have some new tools, So we do have landscape recovery. We talked to that. And one of the reasons we did this event with the landowners, and we did it with them first, is because they're absolutely critical in terms of engaging them to be able to take that action. So we have got some new tools, but the condition monitoring doesn't come up with all the solutions in the same way the diffuse water pollution plan doesn't come up with the solutions. We recognise that there is a need for change, for land use change, that the current situation is not going to achieve favourable condition. We're very honest about that. But Natural England alone does not have the solutions to...
Could I ask then that you pass that up the ladder, because somebody somewhere has to be accountable for implementing the changes, because otherwise every report I've ever read, voluntary doesn't work. And that's in your own reports, which I can quote back to you, the EA's reports, which I can quote back to them. Everyone's saying voluntary doesn't work, and there's a big gap there. So without some form of change, systems change, this is just a really nice wish list rather than actually what's going to happen by when.
Yep, and it wasn't produced to be, it's there to guide us and guide information. But yeah, all I can do is say that Natural England is taking forward in the way we can the new tools we've got to deliver. And this report is published, it's there, it can be shared more widely. It's a very, very good and strong piece of evidence that Natural England stands by.
Yeah, it is. I think it's very good. But the point is, it's a condition report. It's not the plan. The plan is the nutrient management plan or the catchment management plan. And that's where this will become a really important kind of element to take into that. But there's also, we cannot turn to one regulator and say, why can't you go and fix this? We also can do something as a board, as a group, as a partnership, as can the catchment partnership, should we wish to. I'm only the chair. Councillor Charlton.
Thank you, Chair. And I would like to thank you very much for the report. Sitting at home reading the report on your own doesn't mean anything when you're not a scientist and you don't get involved in this on a day-to-day basis. So that presentation was really, really useful. I did use the benefit of AI to help me look at some questions so that they at least came from a place of a little bit of knowledge. But I picked up exactly what Christine picked up actually when she started her question, is that what is happening across the border in Wales. And I can see that Wales has actually done something, but it's not joined up here. And in that realm of collaboration and working together, we must find a way of making sure that we do join up. The Lugg does rise in Powys, and I'm concerned to see that actually it doesn't look like Powys is doing anything. So it's something I need to pick up and take back to my authority. I'm not sure what we can do, but we've also got Anne Weedy from NRW Wales, NRW here as well, and maybe she's got some feedback that that we can have. But I do know that from my perspective and your presentation that you've given, is that riparian ownership is really key to this. I mean, the river runs through people's land. It runs through ownership that belongs to others outside of our board, outside of our statutory authorities, and working with them. And thank you to Claire, just sort of explaining that you have gone back to riparian owners and find the best way forward. So I'd quite like to see how we're going to join up this this plan, which is this really, really good plan, not plan, really good evidence-based document, which will enable us to then use that evidence to build up our action plan going forward from the Nutrient Management Board, because we know that the contributors coming into the Wye play as an important role in what's going, you know, what's happening to the Wye as in their own catchments themselves, so in their own rivers. So for me, the biggest issue here is, what are we doing about collaboration across that border? We know it's happening, but it would have been really good to have seen something in this report to show that that is happening. If it is, I'm assuming it's happening. I am rather assuming it's happening. Yeah.
Do we give Anne, do you want to come in?
Yeah, I can come in. So yeah, thanks, Councillor Charlton. So the Lugg is, it has a different sort of classification in Wales. So on the English side of the border, it's both a triple SI and a special area of conservation, or a SAC. In Wales, it's not a designated SAC, it's a triple SI. It's quite a long way up the river system as far as the Wye goes in Wales. And largely from a water framework directive point of view, which is another way that we assess and classify rivers, most of those tributaries on the Welsh side are either high or good status. So it isn't top of our list of priorities when it comes to looking at those problematic areas on the Welsh side of the border. Those areas tend to happen a bit further downstream on the Welsh Wye, or the Welsh tribs. So, I think traditionally we always knew that there was the short stretch on the Welsh side, which was the Norton Brook, where we had the issues with the sewage from the old Norton sewage treatment works. Those have been dealt with now, and that smaller trib is showing signs of improvement. So at the point at which that river crosses the border, it's not top of our list of sites to target on the Welsh side of the border. I mean, I do completely take your point about, maybe, Eni and ourselves could have done something to actually sort of frame this, at the point at which it entered Wales, and maybe there is something for us, Claire, to take away, to think about that, the next time we do this. But I think for us there are other higher priority tribs that we are more concerned about than the tribs of the Lugg on the Welsh side.
Yeah, can I just come back there? I was looking at the dots. It was really informative. The last map you showed, which showed the dots going back, they're yellow dots, so they're either moderate or a bit higher than moderate, not red, by any stretch of the imagination. But that's literally, as it comes over the border, there was quite a lot of yellow dots on there. There could have been amber, but from memory they were a yellow colour. So I wonder whether we do need to address that. But thank you, Anne. That's really useful to know that. Thank you.
Okay, Paul.
Just briefly, just interested, won't be any great surprise. Just interested, we talked about barriers a few times during the summaries. Just off the top of your head, have you got any clue as to actually how many barriers you identified over the four units?
Again, that's probably one for Daisy, if she can remember. Otherwise, you might
I can't remember off the top of my head. I can get back to you in just a minute if you would like, and I can just check. I think it was about 19.
I recall 19 as well. Yeah.
Yeah.
We'll go with 19, and we'll get back to you if it's different. If that's okay.
No, that's fine. I'm actually quite surprised at how high that is. So that's interesting. Okay, thanks very much.
Councillor May. Oh, sorry.
Sorry, just to add on to that comment about the channel structures and weirs. I think maybe a good opportunity to say that this is something that EA have been very actively prioritizing in either lowering, removing them, or looking at improving fish passage. So it is something that is very active on their agenda, and I think, if we look again, at the next condition assessment that may happen in numerous years, that situation may be different by then, because it is a very active effort on all our parts.
No, I really understand that, and I know that I've got a lot of work going on, and that's why I was actually quite surprised that when you did your review in 2025, you'd actually potentially identified 19. That's a much bigger number over that geographic range than I expected. So thanks for that.
Thanks, Paul. Councillor Maybe.
Thank you. Yeah, it was a question about the implementation and what detail we've got around the land management, the landowners. If I've understood correctly, the key problem area in terms of causes of difficulties is land management along the Lugg. and therefore that's where we've got to focus in on making changes and improvements. And I wondered whether, I mean, it sounds like you have made contact with landowners, you know who they are. I wondered whether what the number, how many there were. Are the problems in, you know, with one or two landowners, or is it typical along the whole river? So it's the scope really about the work that needs to be done to make that improvement.
Yeah, so the scope is quite significant. So I'm trying to remember off the top of my head. I think just for the Lugg, well over 100, about 150 different owner occupiers. That's just along the
Right.
riparian corridor. So I think
Right.
the important thing to note is, although we have had proactive farm advice campaigns along the riparian corridor, because obviously that is key for certain things in terms of that habitat. As Gertrude and Daisy and as the report noted, it is actually catchment scale, catchment wide scale. So actually the nutrients are coming from the whole of the catchment. So
Right.
just targeting riparian landowners isn't enough. It's about, and that is it's thousands of landowners. And, you know, and they vary hugely. Some of them are very small, some of them big arable, a lot of them can be tenants, a lot of them are commercial. So the range there is absolutely huge. But that doesn't mean that we're not making huge inroads into doing that, and that is a big part of the work we do. I think one of the things and some of the feedback from the landowners that we engaged at the event was there was a quite active interest in landscape recovery projects. So the Wye-scapes is going through assurance at the moment, and that's because it's that 20-year joined up approach which had a lot of resonance with landowners, as opposed to a 3-year voluntary scheme which gave them no assurance into the future. So we continue. We also have our catchment sensitive farming advisors have a priority list which identifies those land holdings which we would deem to be most high risk in terms of nutrients, and that's based on things like the type of farm, where that farm is, and so there is a kind of prioritised list that our farm advisors use, together with gathering information at events and very often just proactively picking up the phone and trying to get engagement, especially over the last year with those landowners that haven't engaged us previously. So that's the kind of wider work we do. So the scale of the Wye catchment is very significant.
And the type of actions that we would need them to take, are they, in your view, relatively, I'm going to say simple, but are they practice changes rather than fundamental business changes, in the sense of
some fundamental
relinquishing
business
land?
changes that
It
would be
is,
required.
right.
Yeah. So
Right.
you know, the Wye catchment is a hugely productive agricultural powerhouse that, you know, is that has significant amounts both of arable crop but also kind of livestock farming. So in terms of looking at land use change, you would sometimes be looking at significant changes to a farming business. And again, that's why sometimes things like that landscape recovery, where you're looking at 20 years, if you're going to make fundamental changes to your business. So some of the changes can be quite straightforward and quite simple. So we've got SFI coming now. We can put buffer strips in, and you can do, you know, some arable reversion. There's some things that are really much more simple that we can do and are ongoing and are having good results. But in terms of the overall, when you're looking at the Lugg catchment as a whole, as the report says, there are some bigger significant land use changes that we're going to have to enable to achieve favourable condition. I don't know if, Daisy or Gertrude, if there's anything else you wanted to add to that in terms of technical. Is that okay? Yeah.
So, yeah, Louise?
Okay, I had a couple of points on the going back to siltation. I wondered whether there was, this is a question really to Daisy and Gertrude possibly, you have data from the 1980s on silt in the river, stocking density along the river, arable cover, tree cover, and water temperature that could be added into those factors affecting algal growth now, or do we only have data on sort of percentage algal cover?
Are you all right to pick that up, Daisy?
Yeah, I can take siltation. So, siltation is well known to be really quite difficult to monitor. And it's worth also saying that there are no current set siltation targets for rivers, and how we've monitored siltation over time has changed. So, previously we would look at sort of like suspended solids in the water, and now we utilize more observational data. So there are no real sort of robust records recording siltation levels. We can use things like historic river habitat surveys and historic macrophyte surveys, because they'll record things like the amount of silt within the channel substrate. So we can look at things like that. But the problem is that's just a snapshot in time, and that can change if you have a big spate flow, or in different conditions. I did look at this as part of the assessment and try to pick out change, and it does, but really like caution that with saying it's not necessarily like an incredibly robust way of assessing changes in siltation, but siltation as a percentage of channel substrate had increased in our surveys compared to sort of earlier surveys within the 1980s. But I wouldn't say that we have we don't have a database which can give us a definitive answer there. And then I don't know about livestock density and stocking. I know DEFRA obviously hold records, but yeah, I don't know if anyone like Claire or Gertrude could pick up those other ones.
No, it wouldn't form part of the assessment, so that historic data doesn't form part of the assessment. So yeah, we don't have it for this survey.
And the other point on sediment fingerprinting, as an appeal from the river in terms of how urgently we need to get sediment out of the river and prevent more silt and sediment going into the river. As part of that approach to exploring, rather than a focus entirely on exploring where the sediment is come from, can we put forward an experimental approach to implement wide buffers and, for example, fencing 50 metres back from the river as an experimental way to see whether that actively reduces the amount of sediment going in, rather than just focusing on tracing where it's coming from as another tranche of work, and then hopefully some voluntary changes.
So yeah, what we want to do, as always, is go ahead with implementation and action that's going to achieve favourable condition, as opposed to keep finding new evidence. We can do both at the same time, and that's what we'd aim to do. In terms of that, I think that's something that it might be worth thinking about the field trials, the DEFRA funded, because that would need coordination, and so I think that's something, exactly that, in-field lab studies. Is this going to make a difference that we can do? Obviously, we currently try and, as you saw on the final slide there, there is buffer slips available through SFI. We promote that. So we do all of that. But in terms of that kind of more rigorous in-field studies, I think the DEFRA funding, that's what it's there for, to do those in trials. So I'd definitely say that's something we could seek through that mechanism.
Okay, thank you. So I'm just mindful of the time. Gertrude, do you want to come in?
I'm just going to just add on a little bit to what Claire was saying. So just in terms of the sediment fingerprinting, again, this was something that landowners really spoke a lot about. That is something that they really would desire. And there is actually already a sediment fingerprinting study that was done back in 2010 by a doctoral student. I found the study online. So I think one thing that we're conscious about is whether there's been enough change, maybe significant change over that period. Because if you think about it, it is 16 years. So we hope what to do is just to verify whether that study is still valid. So I think that would be the approach we would take. So we should be able to sort of, yeah, hopefully move a bit quicker than having to sort of commission a full 3-year study. But other than that, we are also very eager to address the sort of the signal crayfish challenge in the catchment. And again, already looking and talking to academics about designing some potential experiments in the river. So again, completely hearing you on the sort of experimental side of things. And I think we're definitely eager to give things a go as soon as we can, really.
Okay, thank
Thank
you.
you.
Mary.
I'll try and be really quick because I know we've exhausted it a little bit. One technical question, which I think Anne has kind of intimated at, the condition report says that the Lugg is an SSSI and a SAC. The Mott MacDonald pilot project for the Herefordshire Upper Lugg and Arrow says that it isn't a SAC. It says it affects the SAC, but it isn't the SAC. This is a question I get asked a lot, and I always say they're the same, they're both, but if we can just kind of make sure that everybody writing plans and projects and reports is aware that they are or they aren't, if I'm wrong. That's just one point, because they're two parallel documents at the moment. When you say the event, Claire, do you mean the one that I was at? And in the afternoon, or you mean just the one in the morning?
Just the one in the morning.
Okay, so there were about 8 landowners attending, including myself. So I think we have to be really conscious of the feedback we got and how many people that represented. And the good thing was they were different people. They're people that don't normally come to those meetings, and that was refreshing. There must be a better way that we can work on approaching other people. Otherwise, it's not going to work, because as you've said, it's voluntary, collaborative. We're still relying on people that can do it or not do it. That's not good enough. So my other point is, how can we help you reach other people that we all live with and work alongside and do things like that? The River Arrow Trust, for example, would be very keen to explore our Arrow cluster, which Rural Hub have expressed an interest in helping us with. Can we help you get this to more people? That's an offer. You can take it, not take it, it's up to you. But within that, the summary for landowners is so brief, and I understand why, because you need them to read it, but some of the language in the report is really good and sets a new context for what we've all been troubled with for probably going on for 10 years now. If we could bring some of that information into the landowner, 3-page document, I think it really helps them. So they're not going to read that other document. I struggled to read it, and I like it. It's a really good document. Well done, guys. You've done a really good job. And I like the language. And at the meeting, I said to you, I like the way that you all came back with those obvious questions about, it's the water company, what about septic tanks? And I thought you all handled that really, really well. But we need that to be in that paper document that they're all going to get given and shared around. So that's one thing I'd say. Then you could say about the apportionment, rather than, we'd have had it mentioned in 2 meetings online, but if it's in that document, then they'll understand that it isn't the water company, because the apportionment has changed. And it's not because there's some sort of trickery to it. Welsh Water had to spend hundreds of millions of pounds to do it. So it's not a kind of a gift. It was hard fought, and we're all paying for it. But you could also put in there about it being unfavourable declining is 1 category above partially destroyed. If that doesn't make people think, I might put a river buffer in, I don't know what else will, until they are requested and maybe made to look at river buffers as a catchment-wide position. And that I've got other points, but just to tie it up, when you say we need to enable them to do it, Claire, pollution, whether that's through nutrients and soil, they're illegal, so we don't need to enable anybody to not do it. That needs to stop, and then we need to enable better work on top of that. And that comes to the Wye-scapes. I appreciate everybody's really excited about it. The decline in the catchment starts above the point where Wye-scapes starts. So we mustn't keep relying on Wye-scapes and landscape recovery to fix the problem where the Arrow and the Froome and the Lugg are not included. So as a plea to us, we need to either extend the Wye-scape scheme up to the other landowners, or we need to say we need a different scheme for that area.
Yes, I'll come back really briefly on that. So yeah, completely recognise that we've got 1 landscape recovery project. That is not enough to solve the problem, but there was significant interest. And thank you for that feedback, especially on the landowner summary, which if you don't get to it, it's at the end of the report, and also produce that infographic. So that landowner summary and the infographic went out either by post for those who couldn't get email, or by email to every landowner. So yeah, I'll check that with you afterwards, because our database was woefully out of date, and we recognise that, and we tried to do quite a bit of work to remediate that. But it is quite, yeah, but we're very aware that the owner-occupier data wasn't fully up to date. So we did try and send it out to as many people as possible. And we're aware that this is for the Lugg. What we want to do is make sure we've learnt the lessons from it and are able to improve it for when we roll out the same sort of format for the Wye. So all the feedback around, yeah, what you want to see in that summary. I think it's quite a fine balance between getting them to read it and pick it up and acknowledge it. But yeah, so, and feel free, we'd really appreciate feedback. You can just email me or send me that feedback, because we very much want to kind of continue to improve that. We were disappointed with the uptake on the day. We tried bacon butties, you know, and again, we'll look at ways we can engage more widely with that and get higher uptake. We do engage a huge amount of farmers, through our sort of working closely with Farm Herefordshire and through our CSF. But again, any contacts you've got or any groups you know, please do let us know.
I think there's definitely something we can do to help with that. But also because I know you've been doing this for years and years through your catchment sensitive farming, I know it hasn't worked, Claire. So it's not a criticism. It's not like you haven't tried hard enough. But when something doesn't work again and again, just do something different.
Yeah, no, we need
there are other ways of
our
reaching these
approach to
people, but
engagement.
also the context we have now is so different. And there's no way of arguing out of the facts that we all have on our kind of laptops.
I think there's something in that. I think there is something in that. It's a really interesting point. Again, it goes back to this kind of language. And in a sense, why do we think that farmers need to be told everything in this kind of anodyne, here's a pretty picture, and we're not really quite going to tell it as it is? I think they need to be engaged in a way that is as robust as the language of the report, and making clear what the state of this river is, because kind of they will go, wow, okay, I didn't know that. I really need to get stuck in.
And
I think it's just there's a I don't know, it's a thought. I'm gonna let Catherine come in here from the NFU, because I'm sure she'll have some ideas on that.
Hi there. Yeah, I just wanted to say hello to Claire, and that you're very welcome to ping anything my way to help get out to farmers and help increase engagement as well. We often share things for the Rural Hub, but if you want to have another go at a meeting or anything round two, do just get it over to me, and I'm more than happy to help and support.
So, but Catherine, do you think that farmers would respond differently to a more kind of, straightforward and robust approach to say this is how it is?
Yeah, I do agree with straight talking. I think is helpful. I think you can talk plainly without judgment. I think that would be the key.
Absolutely.
There. Just if that people feel attacked, it's so easy to turn off. Whereas like Claire did mention, saying that actually a lot are there is an active interest in landscape recovery. Yeah, I would say we do recognise that. There's obviously areas that we still need to work on, but I appreciate that straight language is helpful. So yeah, more than happy to try and pick up on that as well.
Yeah, I mean, we did try. So there was no intention to kind of soften the message in that landowner summary. What we were trying to do is just summarise it in a really clear and precise way. So there was no intention to kind of water anything down. So it's really interesting to get that feedback that's how it read to others, because that certainly wasn't the intention. It was just, how do we put this in the most concise format possible? So we'll take that on. Yeah, we'll take that feedback.
I think it says might, Larrabell may be contributing to the siltation in the river in that summary. I read that in the report somewhere. I was like, really, it may be.
And I think the point that Catherine's made is also exactly correct. But we need to talk about it in a way that is honest and straightforward and clearly communicated, without judgment, without straying outside of that. Because actually, what we all need to do is understand what is the problem, and what is the cure, and let's get on with that. Let's find the solution, get on with it. But everyone needs to start on the same page, and we're not quite there yet. I feel. But anyway, I'm going to wind this up. Sorry, Adam, did you want to come in? Did you? Okay. Sorry, Catherine.
Very briefly, thank you, Chair. Yeah, my only point, building on Mary's point, was obviously I think we're still facing the same issues that we're facing 25 years ago. And these are kind of wicked problems. So again, kind of trying to trial new approaches and have a slightly higher appetite for risk and a willingness to get things wrong, but to also listen. Yeah, I'm not. I don't think necessarily telling the farmers in a stronger voice or giving them more options in a clearer format is going to make any difference, because that's been around for decades. The point is, we've been using fairly tame solutions whereby we send out a book and say, why don't you do one of these things? And they say, because one of three things. Firstly, I don't feel socially obliged. Secondly, there's not legislation telling me I have to do it. Or thirdly, it's not financially viable. And I can't do this because I need to also worry about looking after my family, paying my mortgage, putting food on the table, and making sure I bring in an income. So I think there is that broader point about saying, rather than just taking these kind of short-term approaches and renting outcomes for a few years, it is about trying to understand how you can sustainably change the business model for the farmer, and that is entirely unique to every single landowner. And we are now getting to requiring diffuse solutions to the diffuse problems. The point source challenge that we had, which Dŵr Cymru very gratefully took up the baton with and addressed, has been significant apportionment to a single organisation, the water company. But by 2032, that will pretty much all be out of the system. Beyond that, we still have 80% in the system, which is diffused between thousands of people. So we can't continue to take a kind of a broad spectrum approach. It has to be individualised, which probably means we need significantly more resource, but we also need to try new approaches.
Yep, absolutely. And I'd say that's the role of this board, and that's why we're all here.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you. Right, I'm going to draw a line under that now. Is it really, really okay?
Super quick, just to say, thanks to Natural England for the report, and I hope that the message in that report is that the voluntary actions don't work, and as a branch of government, that needs to be the message going to government, that we do need legal change to implement this. But one thing I would say, as the river, and that is that the floodplain and the river are the same thing. The floodplain is part of the river, and yet the river has essentially been privatised, because it is assumed when you purchase land that you own the river because you own the floodplain. And we go round in circles, because essentially the rivers are in private ownership, and what private ownership do within their business is what we can't change as a nutrient management board, and we can only hope to engage as government agencies. However, if we perceived rivers differently, as we cannot afford as a country to pay farmers to do the right thing everywhere, and the business model is increased industrialisation of farming, which we are not going to be able to change unless we can change the global economy. So we need to see rivers and their floodplains as one thing that cannot be owned. And if we lifted rivers and their floodplains out of private ownership and nationalised rivers as water, the causal agent of life, something too precious to be owned, and we said that you cannot have arable within 50 metres of that river because that is the floodplain. We're simplifying a floodplain here to a very small area. I appreciate that. If we said you can't have your livestock in that floodplain because it's part of the river, and we simply made that a rule, a law, that our rivers and their floodplains were not privately owned and couldn't be used for private profit to the harm of the river, we would take out of the problem this need to subsidise and pay farmers to do the right thing, or the need for punitive laws. So we could just simplify this. That would be my plea from the river. Can we take that up to national government somehow?
Okay, thank you. So I'm going to leave it there. The last word was to the river. Thank you very much for that. Okay, so the next item on the agenda is the review of nitrogen target for the River Wye. So I will just summarise that briefly, because we have the paper with the agenda. The request that we raised as a board, any have taken that away. They're looking at it, and we will start to hear back from them through their process of assessment next year with a consultation and way forward. So that's good. And actually, just apropos of that, when we talk about, we were looking at graphs saying that the nutrients have gone down. That graph is not the nutrients. It's the soluble reactive phosphate. So it's just one element. So to tie that too tightly to, and therefore something algae, we don't, unless we also have a graph looking at total phosphorus and nitrogen nitrates, we're not understanding the whole picture. Okay, so moving on again, agenda item 6, Cymru, Welsh Water. Bit of an update from you, Dan. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Prynawn da bawb. Yeah, I'm just going to give you a brief update today with regards to the Ofwat investigation that was undertaken over the last couple of years. Basically, there's been kind of outcomes there kind of that have been published by both Ofwat and Dŵr Cymru's reaction. So yeah, kind of in short, kind of just to start off, Dŵr Cymru and the water industry in the wider context, they've got a number of regulatory bodies such as Natural Resources Wales, EA, Natural England, just spoken today, the Drinking Water Inspectorate for the clean drinking water aspect of the business, and then Ofwat, and they'll tend to be the financial regulators, but obviously they'll look at the performance of the companies also. So in July 2024, Ofwat's investigation covered water companies across England and Wales. Some of the English companies had started previous to that point. But they started looking in at the management and performance of wastewater treatment works as well as the sewer networks. So predominantly looking at the storm overflow interactions and kind of a follow-on from that. There was a vast amount of data kind of that the water companies shared, event duration monitoring events, which is the natural standardized kind of process that we record our kind of spill data. Then we've got MCERT's data kind of at our treatment works, looking at the flow, how that travels in and out of the works, what goes into storm tanks, what gets discharged during storm events and non-storm events. And then looking at the compliance in that, so looking at the Urban Wastewater Treatment Directive and the wider environmental permits that we hold via EA and NRW. So they were looking at a lot of data sets and looking at means and ways of where there was shortcomings from that part. So for storm overflows, Dŵr Cymru for that part have got 2,300 storm overflows across all of our operating area, that being in England and in Wales. So yeah, kind of there's a vast amount of assets out there, being on the western side of the UK. We do have lots more rainfall. However, kind of this is kind of not an excuse, but this was obviously being looked at. During AMP6, so 2015 to 2020, all the water industry were targeted to put in event duration monitoring kind of installations. All of this data is available on our website, and so for that we went in quite hard and quite early, and basically meaning kind of the more information and the more data we've got, that will give us kind of better kind of outcomes in future kind of to be able to invest in the right ways. For our wastewater treatment works, we have 836, and the flow monitoring process travelling through the site there was used to investigate the compliance measures. So some of these examples were full flow to treatment, so that's the maximum flow rate of wastewater as it travels through the works, and that's designed and permitted to treat. If you're not kind of within compliance of that flow treatment, it means that potentially there's some issue at site and you could potentially be discharged into the storm tanks too early and then returning that for treatment later on. There was dry weather flow, and that represents the average of volume of wastewater entering the treatment works during dry periods without rainfall. So if you find any exceedances in that, it's potentially kind of infiltration or groundwater or surface water kind of coming into the sewer network, or you've had some growth kind of take place and you haven't done the necessary kind of amendments down at the works. And then there's the storm tank capacity. The size of the storm tank at the wastewater treatment works, is that designed to, and is it kind of meeting the permit requirements? So basically, are we adequately discharging kind of early to the receiving water course or not? So all of these wide measures, along with many others, were kind of investigated as part of this programme. Of the ones that were seen to have kind of fallen short, plans are underway to remedy all of the root causes of any of the compliance challenges there that were identified, and from the investigation that may be outstanding. However, this investigation was covering a data range from 2017 through to 2023, so it's quite a considerable number of years. So many, if there was a non-compliance, many will have been kind of resolved by now anyway in the first place. However, it was identifying those and bringing that through in the investigation. The outcome of the investigation, obviously, that there were several kind of shortcomings kind of from the company's performance. Now, this has been kind of published on the website from Ofwat, and I've shared it for this to be shared with the minutes of today's meeting so that everybody can see. There is about a 180-page document. There are a couple of shorter appendices there, kind of that will hopefully mean kind of it's not as much of an issue. But there's one section on there that will show the relevant assets kind of that were affected and kind of were highlighted in the investigation. So the outcome was kind of a penalty. Now, normally this works in a similar way to the enforcement undertakings, which has previously been discussed in previous board meetings. But there was two options. To receive a penalty, the fees would go directly to the Treasury, or there was an option for a redress package, which would effectively mean kind of any of the funds would remain within the operating area. So a 44.7 million redress package was put forward from Welsh Water, and then in June 2026, this was accepted by Ofwat. So a breakdown of the redress package, 40.6 million was put towards kind of improving storm overflows. So this was seen as obviously the largest portion, but the cost of those schemes are kind of vastly kind of significant. So there's 7 additional storm overflows that have been identified, and they will be brought forward. So these were planned in for AMP9, so for 2030 to 2035. These will be brought forward and put in place during this AMP period by 2030. There are none in the Wye and Lugg catchment. They seem to be for the West Wales and North Wales areas, and this is based on kind of assessments that have been carried out. So we've gone on the basis of those assessments. There's a £2 million river restoration budget that will be shared with Afonydd Cymru and kind of the partnering kind of rivers trusts across the catchment. That will be looking at supporting fish migratory passages and obviously ensuring this not linked with any particular assets that Welsh Water would actually carry out as part of our National Environment Programme. We then have £1 million for a misconnection task force. So quite regularly the local authorities, Welsh Water and NRW or EA will investigate and kind of remedy misconnection from drainage foul to surface at property level. So this will be again targeted and kind of drawn up to kind of readdress many of the outstanding issues there. And then finally, we've got a £1 million Cymuned Natur Fund, so that's community and nature. It will be a fund for community groups and charities across our operating area, looking to enhance the natural environment. So that, the final three there, they're kind of currently being designed and kind of pulled together in a form that we'll be able to kind of open the funds up to members of the public and charities and NGOs and so on. And kind of we will be publicising kind of those funds kind of in the coming months to make that available for all. The deadline for those then will be 2030, so kind of work will be underway, similar to other kind of funding methods that we've done before, so opening certain windows throughout the year. And obviously there'll be set criteria for the funds there. The one key message really is that, you know, kind of none of the money here will be kind of customers' money in that sense. It will be from the company's reserves to ensure that obviously kind of that's where the findings have been. There's a lot of internal kind of reviews being carried out now from the findings of the investigation as well. So we are looking at the positives from that. You know, kind of there's a large transformation project going on in the company, looking at the way we're governed, looking at the way we're working, and kind of streamlining as well, kind of our performance. So many things are underway, but that's kind of a brief outline of the investigation there for you.
Thanks, Dan. Has anyone got any questions? Yeah, Andrew.
Can I just ask you a question, Dan? It's a technical question, really. It's about technical progress. To what extent are you able, or are you planning to be able to treat things like nitrates, prions, antibiotics, forever chemicals, that sort of thing? Where are you with that?
Yes, currently several of those are probably emerging risks there. So the current works aren't really designed to remove kind of forever chemicals. So and this is not only in Welsh Water's perspective, it's in the, you know, the wider industry. So there's several types of investigations that's going on there. We run and we're a part of a chemical investigation program who look at various methods and kind of various risks that do come in, along with all the other water companies and Ofwat, so they kind of coordinate that. And what they'll often do is kind of pick different parts of the country, I guess, just to see which will give us the better outcomes from these projects and from these types of investigations. There is more and more work coming, you know, around the corner about kind of microplastics, as you say, forever chemicals. Kind of, it's a massive thing for us from a waste treatment side, but also from the drinking water aspect as well, because we abstract off different sections of the rivers as well. So yeah, it's something that is closely being monitored. However, the levels there are far less than kind of the emerging wider risks there, you know. So they are being looked at, but I think the solutions will kind of be coming kind of in the next 10, 20, 30 years further down the line.
So, I mean, you're at the sort of experimentation side and the research side, but implementation would take, is long term then?
Yeah, I mean, with forever chemicals, it's almost stopping at a source would be the far more reasonable outcome, you know, which is just as difficult. So to expect a water company to take it out at the end is almost too late by that point. But it's, again, it's what we were talking about earlier. It's a systems change, and that's often quite a challenge and often scary. But it has to be the right thing for the environment, and you know that's what we need on that kind of scale.
Thanks.
Yeah, that's right. Thank you. Councillor McDermott, if you could just turn your microphone. Thank you so much. Thank you. Councillor Charlton.
Just a quick observation. I'm glad you brought that up. It's on the back of what Councillor Andrew said. Is in waste and recycling, we now have the extended producer's responsibility, which is basically a tax on the producers, rather than expecting that the councils or local authorities have to deal with waste at the other end. There is now funding that comes in, which has come from the producers. I wonder whether something like that could be done, and it's sort of on the back of what Louise was saying earlier as well. It isn't the water companies. It isn't the water companies that are creating this problem. It's created much further up the food chain, if you like, and we're not addressing that. And I think if we wait for 20 or 30 years to look at the forever chemicals, there will all be, well, I won't be here then anyway, but you know, our future generations are really going to suffer. So I agree with what's been said. We need to do something, and it shouldn't all land on the water companies, because at the end of the day, it's you and me that's paying, because
Thank
we
you.
all have to pay for water.
Thank you, Councillor Charlton. So I think I'm just going to say that that's not really a nutrient issue. But
Yes.
I'm sure that will be taken back to the catchment partnership.
Yeah, I've got to leave. I'm really sorry,
Okay.
Lisa. I've
All
got to
right.
leave at
Thank
4
you.
o'clock. Thank you.
Thank you. All right.
I'll be really quick, but it is a really good point Dan made about addressing things at source rather than expecting us to fix it once it's happened. And that could apply to siltation or nutrients in the river as much as it can to forever chemicals going into our system. The one thing missing from every plan we're currently talking about, writing about, looking at, going through graphs for, is nobody's really saying about addressing the problem at source before it becomes a problem, not panicking about it afterwards.
Yeah, I suppose, yes, it's a big conversation. Yes, thank you. Thank you, Dan. Sorry? Oh, sorry. Anne, did you want to come in?
Yeah, no, just to respond to that, I mean, a lot of the river restoration projects are focused on, you know, trying to prevent stuff entering the river at source. So, you know, where they're looking at sort of fencing rivers to stop poaching cattle and sheep. You know, so there is some work going into trying to prevent at source. It probably isn't enough, you know, granted, but you know, but I think we're already kind of, you know, on that page and trying to kick that off.
Thanks, Anne. Yeah, literally upstream the problem. Louise.
And whether that's something the Nutrient Management Board can raise higher up the chain, whether it's something we can, and it's not exclusively a nutrient issue, but this idea of tackling things at source, can we, you know, contact Parliament about that we are unable to deal with these problems because we don't have the legislative power to tackle them at source? Can government do something?
I think that'd be a legitimate thing to consider for nutrient and sort of related things like sedimentation.
Well, the import of phosphorus that we don't make it here. We import it from somewhere else. Most of it.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you. So we're going to speed up now because otherwise we're never going to get home. So the agenda item 7 we're going to take as read because we have that in the agenda papers. Agenda item 8, Statutory Officer Group Review, we're going to carry forward to the next meeting. Correct? Items for information from the statutory agencies we will have received. Now that the particularly the data analysis report is quite a large document. Martin Quine isn't here today. If you've got if you're bursting with a bunch of questions about that, then we will arrange a briefing with him, assuming that he's willing to do that. Is that?
I think if Martin's willing to do a briefing on that and Project Tara, I think it's fundamentally important that we
Project Tara
discuss
at the same time because that's also very important. So
and it wouldn't be fair for Claire to take those questions.
Make that request. Well, I think, you know, to be fair, it's a highly technical. The catchment analysis is a highly technical document. I think we do need to go through that, you know, properly. So. If everyone's in agreement with that, and Project Tara is also really
which is less technical, but that I have questions about it being less technical.
But it's very important for the work that we do and to make sure that we understand it properly. So I think that's fair enough. Okay, so then moving on to wider updates. Well, I can update the board that the River Wye now has a charter, which was launched a few weeks back now, and we're now I think, but Dr. Bodden and myself and others are getting a number of contacts from other catchments and other groups who wish to do something similar for their own rivers. So we appear to have started something, which is great. Has anyone else got any wider updates to bring to the board? Yeah, please.
Only on the charter, whether it would be useful to arrange a meeting with the councillors around the River Charter, around how we implement the River Charter, because that's something I'm getting a lot of questions on. So we've got the pledges, but anything else we can discuss in terms of policy or local authorities' actions would be useful conversations maybe to try and have.
Yeah, the pledges kind of are that, though. That's what they are. So what they say is what the local authorities will do over time, because we don't rewrite all our plans and policies in a rush. We do it in a sequence. So,
But you still need officers to know about the charter so that they know that when they make decisions, they take into account. They don't need a policy to do it. They just need to have it in account.
yeah, but it will get embedded within the policies
Later on,
that
but
you
for
need
now,
to have. So if you take the local plan, it will get embedded in the local plan as we write the local plan. But we're not going to write the local plan
in
till
several
2028.
years.
So,
yeah, but don't you need to do the charter pledges
well, no, it
now?
can't no, because you'd have to rewrite the plan.
Well, no, you just
wouldn't
have to show that you've had your
Well,
account of them.
they have a copy of it, but it only becomes a policy when it's a policy in the plan. And we're not going to rewrite the local plan to incorporate the charter. It will get incorporated when we rewrite the plan, because it's quite a big bit of kit, as you know. It's just that's the way it is. Yeah. Okay. All right. So oh, okay. Sorry, Councillor Maybe. Well spotted.
My connection isn't very good. Sorry. Yeah, no, it'd be quite interesting to have that discussion that Louise raised, but for me, it's part of a kind of a wider issue around embedding, and it's a kind of eternal vigilance, embedding sort of the biodiversity awareness and protection across all departments and all operations, and you have to keep going round and round and round with this, and it's a bit like in the past on climate, and I think that the biodiversity bit, people are still it's a nice extra. So I think if I'd be really interested in discussions around that. There's a Future Gen commission in Wales. It's Nature Week this week. There's a Future Gen commission series of discussions and events going on, and there's one around reduced use of pesticides and mowing and different things, how you embed that in asset management. That's just one aspect of it, but just gives you kind of feeling for some of the barriers and issues. And I think as we talked around the charter, it didn't bring new legislation. It gives a framework and reminds people, if you like, these are the things that are there. And I think similarly in Wales with the biodiversity legislation, I'm not completely up to speed on how that is in England. I think it's all similar. This is part of a bigger issue. So I'd love to have that conversation, but maybe just not only just that it's about rivers. That's part of the bigger thing.
Yeah, I'm quite happy to have the conversation. Councillor Charlton.
Yeah, I'd just like to reassure Louise that actually a lot of what's in the charter is already in documentation. The LDP will already be delivering on some of these things. And for me, it's not about what policy needs changing. It's exactly as Catherine has said, it's what we need to embed and remind what's already there and to strengthen those policies. For me, the weakness has always been that we've got all this documentation, we've got all this stuff underpinning the LDP, but it takes a lot of pulling out to make sure that you cover it all, and that things like developers understand what their responsibilities are, what planners understand their responsibilities are being, and then the wider population. So it's not about changing the policies, it's about embedding it. That's all the policies which are already there and highlighting them, and just that constant reminder. And I think that would be a good idea to come together and see how the the amount of interest that's been generated just by doing the charter, how can we make sure that we keep that interest going rather than saying, how do we implement this through a policy? If that makes sense. And I've
Yeah,
got to
I
go
think
because I've got somebody waiting.
you're spot on with that. Thank you, Councillor Charlton. Yes, Councillor McDermott.
It's about, we're talking about, at this point, about promulgating the charter. Now we've actually got one, and when we're going to get together to actually drill down into what we actually do to action the charter in reality. There's also the question of at what stage, I don't want to jump the gun, you see, at what stage do we go around people we know in the public or, you know, clubs and whatever, and say, are you going to do a charter? Is that jumping the gun, or should we be talking about that now?
I think you can have those conversations now. Okay, thank you. Right, date of the next meeting, Wednesday the 7th of October at 2 p.m. Thank you very much. You can finish the live stream.